They found his van on the shoulder of Highway 89, 2 miles north of nothing and 6 from a town the map forgot. The headlights were still on, casting long beams into the darkness like fingers searching for something they could never grasp. He wasn't famous. He wasn't celebrated. His work didn't hang in galleries or decorate coffee table books. But he had followers, quiet ones. Scholars of the strange, archivists of the fringe, people who believed that Elias had captured, through his lens, something that wasn't supposed to exist. Inside the vehicle, a half-eaten apple, notebook with smeared graphite sketches of power lines that led nowhere, and a Leica camera, still warm. His questions were odd. Had they ever seen a town that didn't stay on the map? The images depicted towns that didn't exist, at least, not officially. Instead, he would say things like, "You have to be looking with more than just eyes," or he stopped photographing people entirely. Her pockets were filled with Polaroids she didn't take. In each image, Elias stood alone, staring at something just beyond the edge of the frame. His later work focused almost exclusively on empty intersections. Abandoned farmhouses, derelict amusement parks, all seemingly untouched by decay, as though preserved by an unseen curator. The colors were too vivid, the shadows too deep. They're closer when you're most certain they aren't real. But those who stood there on cloudless nights reported hearing shutters clicking in the dark, even though no cameras were present. But those who examine his photos under infrared light have noticed something chilling, a second set of shadows, slightly out of sync with our own. As though another version of America, stitched by forgotten roads and misremembered dreams, is watching from just beyond the frame. Their names were off by a single letter from real places. Their architecture looked correct, but always slightly wrong. Fire hydrants too tall. Windows with 13 panes. Children whose faces were blurred, not from motion, but... He wrote letters to people who hadn't existed for 100 years, addressed to towns that were evacuated during the Dust Bowl, but somehow postmarked only days prior. When developed, they showed a town no one could name, bisected by a river that did not match any known waterway. Every building had its doors open. In every window, a figure stood motionless, faceless. In the center of the town square, a sign hung from rusted chains. "Welcome to Belleridge. Established never. Population, not yours." His final notebook, recovered from his van, ended with one sentence, scribbled over and over in trembling hand. "The roads double back when you aren't watching." As if the lens itself refused to resolve them. Its contents are mostly blacked out, except for a chilling line at the bottom. Subject appears to be documenting alternate architectural phenomena consistent with pattern delta. Did they remember an old railway station where the clock spun backward? Was there a church whose bells rang only during eclipses? One recording dated July 3, 1987, was particularly unsettling. I think I saw them again, not people echoes, maybe. Reflections, but they smiled, and they knew me, or they knew who I could have been. The photographer himself, Elias Ray Hollow, was nowhere to be seen. A few stared too long before saying no. For those who knew of Elias, which were few, his disappearance was merely the final signature on a lifetime of ghosting the edges of visibility. He was last seen in northern Arizona, asking locals about the other side of Route 9, though no one quite understood what he meant. Most dismissed him. But Elias kept driving, his trail leaving behind rolls of undeveloped film and strange, fragmented voice notes. The earliest sign that something was different in Elias's work came in 1983, when he submitted a series of black and white photos to a fringe magazine called Threshold Americana. No one knew where he found these places. The metadata was stripped, and Elias never answered questions directly. By 1985, Elias was obsessed. An assistant of his, Greta Lauren, claimed she once followed him on a shoot in Nebraska, only to wake up in a motel 200 miles away with no memory of how she got there. The government files on Elias obtained through a FOIA requests decades later contain redacted sections and one heavily marked document titled Project Mirrorway, Civilian Contact. In the months before he vanished, Elias had grown gaunt and erratic. But perhaps most unsettling were the negatives found in his last roll of film. The coordinates penciled on the back of the photo led only to an empty plain. What Elias Hollow Fandor what found him has never been conclusively identified. If you follow the last coordinates Elias Hollow left behind, just a string of numbers scrawled in the margins of a napkin from a defunct diner U. L. N. end up in nothingness. Not a poetic void, but a literal expanse. Flatlands where wind has more memory than the earth itself. Grass grows sideways here. The fences are rusted, but unbroken. No birds, no wires, no sky-stamped contrails, just silence. That was how he phrased it in his journal. It comes first in dream, form stitched to the back of my eyelids. But it's there. It's a structured to be illusion. Belleridge didn't appear on any official map, but Elias was certain it existed somewhere in the folds of America's memory. Where things misplaced don't die, but wait. And if you stand long enough, let your eyes unfocus just slightly. There is a chance just a breath of one you might see rooftops rising and sinking like breath in the distant heat waves. Streets with names he never told anyone. Storefronts with signs written in his childhood handwriting. It pulls you in, not like a trap, but like gravity. Like ... It's your fault for noticing it. A barber's pole spinning slowly in a window, and the barber was his father, who had died in 1971. Human eyes, the same eyes, Elias's eyes, 12 times over. A woman in Tennessee who vanished for 3 days and returned with a birthmark in the shape of a steeple. A hitchhiker in Montana who kept a crumpled receipt in his wallet from a Belleridge diner dated 1912. Only ... There was no other side. Just white, like fog, but dry. Dead air. No wind. No time. I waited 3 hours for a clock tower to strike, and when it did, it was the sound of my own name shouted backwards. You're circled places with long histories of thin air where compasses spun and radio signals failed. A bench, a mailbox, a man walking into frame. Elias. Possibly, but what disturbed analysts most was not the figure, was the signage, partially obscured by mist, that read, "You were never meant to return." He marked disappearances, not the famous ones, but the quiet vanishings, the librarian in 1949 who walked out for a cigarette. Others say he simply succumbed to madness, swallowed by his own myth. But the unsettling possibility lingers in every grain of his film. What if both are true and never returned? Or the baker in 1963, whose shop continued operating for a week without him. A boy in Oregon who spoke fluent Latin for 3 hours after dreaming of a school in a town with no clocks. When questioned, he only said, "I didn't take that photo. It took me..." This was where Elias claimed to have seen Belleridge. Called it dream architecture. In his sketches, the buildings curved in impossible ways. Doorways leading back into themselves, alleyways that ended in front yards, houses that cast shadows with no sun. But mobile roaming like an animal, sensing when it was being pursued. He swore the sun rose from the west when he stayed too long. Not the first time, no. The first time was in a dream. In his private letters, which Greta Lorne later published posthumously, Elias described Belleridge as the town that remembers you before you exist. The deeper Elias wandered, the more personal Belleridge became. But this wasn't nostalgia. No, it was too detailed to present. He recalled a pet dog from age 7 that he never owned. A girl who kissed him at 17, he never met her in waking life. But her name was carved into a school desk in the Belleridge Elementary. The town was rewriting him, memory by memory, suggesting a version of his life that had almost happened, but didn't, couldn't, shouldn't. He began to write of a mirror logic within Belleridge, a geometry that obeyed something deeper than physics, something almost mythic. He told Greta once over whiskey and static-filled jazz, they don't build Belleridge. It dreams itself into being. One of his most infamous photos now dubbed the gaze of the silent town shows, a row of houses all identical in every detail, except for the eyes that appear in each window. There were reports, few and fragmented, of others who claimed to have brushed up against Belleridge. Patterns began to emerge, geographic, temporal, psychological. Elias mapped them obsessively, overlaying thread and ink across a wall-sized United States map, like a madman from an old noir. The common thread? All had been near Belleridge's reported edges, which Elias theorized weren't fixed. In one final taped recording, his voice trembles, uncharacteristically shaken. I walked the town line today. This was the last known entry from Elias Hollow. After that, only silence. The van, the camera, the warm battery, and the undeveloped roll of film, later known as Frame Zero. When exposed, Frame Zero revealed nothing at first, just fog. But when digitally enhanced, faint shapes emerged. Some believe Elias found Belleridge. There is a photograph, a lesser-known one, often overshadowed by Frame Zero. It isn't catalogued in any official archive, but a grainy copy circulates in niche forums and collector circles under the cryptic title Belleridge 6 a.m. At first glance, it appears unremarkable. A sleepy town square, just before sunrise. Framed by rust-colored brick buildings and lampposts bent ever so slightly inward. A strange choice of storage, certainly, but the thermos was sealed tight. It's almost ritualistically wrapped in 2 layers of cloth, then bound with twine. On the cloth, in ink faded by time and panic, Elias had written, "For when the mirror forgets who it is, but look closer, and the square isn't empty. There's a man standing at its center, eyes lifted to the horizon. Only a wall of pale gray, as if the town is enclosed by a fog that's not weather, but fabric, curtain, veil, the man in the photo." His theories grew more elaborate, yet eerily methodical. One notebook entry he wrote, "What if we are not discovering it, but manifesting it each time? We misremember a name, walk into a room and forget why, or dream of places we've never been that feel like home. It's a fracture not in space, but in consensus. Silhouette is unmistakable. Elias Hollow." The negative was discovered inside a cracked thermos retrieved from the floorboard compartment of Elias's abandoned van. He called this phenomenon reflective construct, and warned that the town was made not of matter, but of recognition. To see it, even in passing, was to add to it. To name it was to feed it. No one knows what he meant. The highway has no record, the road number doesn't align with any known route, and the homes, though resembling 1950s prefab architecture, contain anachronisms. Electric wiring inconsistent with any known model, windows that don't reflect light, mailboxes labeled in a language resembling English, but off, slightly slanted letters. Words that rearrange themselves in different photographs. And in each photo, there was always a mirror, some obvious others hidden in window panes, rain puddles, the gleam of polished stone. That Belleridge was creating replicas, not clones, but variations of himself, of memories, of moments he might have lived. Then who exactly developed the last roll of film? She recalled him saying, "There's a version of me there that never left, and he's still taking photos, but not for us." In all of them, Elias appeared. But not always the same Elias, sometimes older, sometimes dressed in unfamiliar clothes. Once bleeding from the eyes. On either side, instead of fields or fences, stand rows of houses, identical and perfect, like suburban clones. Because several photos from that final reel bear timestamps from after his confirmed disappearance, months after, years in 2 cases, and in one particularly unsettling image taken through a rain-soaked windshield. You can just make out a motel sign flickering the words, "Welcome back, Esther Hollow." And standing in the middle of the road is a traffic sign that reads simply, "You almost back," in identical to Elias, but older, paler, smiling directly into the lens. His letters, once poetic and deliberate, became erratic. In one, he simply wrote the phrase, "The lamplight sings now," 27 times. In another, "I remember things I never lived. I buried a cat beneath a birch tree in Belleridge last night." I never owned a cat. There are no birch trees in Utah. Greta Lorne, his closest confidant, and perhaps the only person to understand the man beneath the myth, whence described Elias as a prisoner of his own reflection. He feared that Belleridge was not merely a place, but a responsa, living thing, reactive. It's intelligent in the way forests are, or oceans, or dreams you can't quite wake from. Once, a woman on a Greyhound bus leaned over and whispered, "The bells rang after you left, but they don't stop anymore." Then she got off at the next stop and walked into a cornfield. When he did, it was just a whisper. "I saw myself yesterday. But, ... not how I remember. I think it's learning me." She recounted one night in 1981 when Elias came to her, gaunt and wide-eyed, clutching a roll of undeveloped film. He wouldn't speak at first. According to her, Elias had begun to encounter people in the real world, strangers on trains. Hotel concierges, a child at a gas station, who recognized him by name before he introduced himself. Elias became convinced that Belleridge had begun to bleed into the real world, or perhaps it always had. What if Belleridge isn't a destination, but a symptom. He believed Belleridge operated on familiarity, the way déjà vu tricks the brain, or how children sometimes speak of past lives. Elias began to deteriorate soon after. But through the unraveling, his camera remained steady. He documented more structured buildings that had no business standing in the modern world. A coal depot with hand-carved signage, a one-room chapel half sunk into the mud, a diner serving food no one remembers eating. The most disquieting image of all, however, came from his final roll. The photo is labeled Exit No. 0. It shows a long stretch of highway, cracked and sun-bleached, vanishing into the distance. Almost, but not quite. Investigators later noted that no such exit exists in that part of the country. Greta said Elias had come to believe he was being mirrored. The question remained, if Elias had become lost to Belleridge... That question still haunts collectors, conspiracy theorists, and archivists alike. The man at the front desk? They say the last true photograph taken by Elias Hollow was not printed by his own hands. It surfaced a year and 6 days after his disappearance, postmarked from a town that didn't exist on any map, sent in a plain, wax-sealed envelope to Greta Lorne, as if the town were not being observed, but had turned its gaze outward. In the lower right corner, scrawled in ink that appeared to have been smeared by a shaking hand, were the words, "We develop what we see. First, the dreams." Always of trains. Trains pulling into stations that smelled of antiseptic and paper rot. Then, the whispers. Not from others, but from reflections, bathroom mirrors, puddles, black computer screens when shut down. He believed Belleridge was not a fixed point, but a recursive artifact, something generated by the act of trying to document it. A myth engine that fed on belief, attention, memory. The report described a man who claimed he had awakened in a town where everyone spoke in dreams and where time moved sideways, fingerprints unreadable. He vanished from the holding cell the next morning. He escaped by following the sound of a shutter click, like a camera that was trying to forget what it had seen. His name by the report was Elias H. Hollow, but the man was 28 years old. Elias would have been 74. The footage was silent, grainy, but unmistakable. Belleridge from angles never before seen, but not maliciously. Belleridge may not hate us, it may not love us, it may simply need us, as all forgotten things do. Some claim he's seen occasionally in subway trains, in the background of surveillance footage, or once even appearing briefly on a live broadcast of a storm report, standing in the distance, camera in hand, staring straight into the storm. People walking in unnatural rhythm, as if bound to a script from another era. But copies float around. They always do. People print them, share them, pin them to walls. And sometimes, only sometimes, if you stare at one long enough, the shadows shift. Just a little, just enough. Trees that bent toward the lens as the camera passed. Signs that read, "Do not develop," hung on empty buildings. Each photo, each whisper of Elias's name, each late-night click through grainy archives was not unearthing the truth, but participating in its creation. Finally, the disappearances, subtle at first, missed appointments, unread letters, then total absence. Like someone rewrote the day without the minute. There was no letter, no signature, only the photo, and a thin line of dark salt tucked inside like an afterthought. They were not historians, not officially. Former photojournalists, linguistic researchers, even a defrocked priest were among their ranks. Their mission was neither to prove nor to debunk, but to contain, because they'd begun to suspect that the images themselves were not records of a parallel place. But invitations. On her desk, a torn page from her journal lay exposed. He was taking photos of them, but they didn't seem to see him. Rather, they did, but didn't care. A reverse haunting. One child broke from the group, walked directly up to the lens, and mouthed the word "closer." The entry was brief. "I think I saw myself in the mirror today, but it blinked first." But her face appears again and again, in different reels, in different eras, sometimes as a child, sometimes as a grown woman with the same eyes and the same red ribbon in her hair. Salt that, under a microscope, resembled ash more than mineral. The photograph, a bedroom, dim and windowless. On the wall, pinned like a relic, is a single black and white photo frame 0, inverted, reversed. Greta vanished 2 months later. Her apartment was found undisturbed, with a pot of tea still warm on the stove, her coat hanging neatly by the door. What followed became known among fringe archivists as the hollow cycloa phenomenon, in which those who spent extended time with Elias' photographs began to experience a pattern of events. By the mid-90s, a small and secretive network known as the Glass Index began gathering all surviving materials related to Belleridge and Elias Hollow. One of their members, known only as Finch, proposed a theory that chilled even the most skeptical among them. The more people looked for Belleridge, the more real it became. Evidence began to emerge, perhaps congealed to support this. In 1999, a missing persons report surfaced from a rural sheriff's department in Montana. DNA inconclusive. Then came the film reels. An anonymous sender likely connected to the Glass Index mailed 4 canisters of 16mm film to an archivist at a private university in upstate New York. One reel showed a small crowd gathered around a man with a camera. No one has been able to determine the child's identity, Finch later wrote in a declassified report. We are being mirrored, yes. Elias Hollow remains missing to this day, or perhaps he doesn't. What's left of his work has been mostly locked away in climate-controlled archives. And if you listen closely, you may hear it. Not a voice, not a warning. A shudder. Click, click. As if something behind the glass is trying to remember your face.